When a Marine elite sniper dropped his rifle on the hospital floor, everyone thought it was just safety protocol, but I saw something nobody else could see, a silent cry for help that would save his life. What seemed like just another routine shift turned into a race against time to save not just his life, but his very humanity. This is a real story about the invisible ghosts that soldiers bring home, and about the nurse who dared to look beyond the uniform. My name is Olivia Brennan, and I have been working as a nurse for 15 years now. 7 of those years I spent in combat zones, mainly in Afghanistan, where I learned something that no textbook could ever teach me. I learned to read what people do not say. I learned to see the invisible wounds that bleed on the inside. After my deployment ended, I thought I had left the war behind when I started working at a military hospital in San Diego, California. But the truth is, the war never really ends. It just changes its uniform and follows our soldiers home. That night in the emergency room started like any other night. The California winter was mild, the hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and coffee, and I was halfway through my 12-hour shift. Then he walked in. A Marine sniper, still in his combat uniform, carrying his rifle across his shoulder. He had minor cuts on his hands and face, probably from training exercises, but it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They were not the eyes of someone with minor injuries. They were the eyes of someone drowning in plain sight. If this story has already grabbed you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now, because what comes next will surprise you even more. The sound still echoes in my mind, the metallic clang of a rifle hitting the tile floor. Everyone in the emergency room turned to look. 2 Marines who had accompanied him immediately stepped forward, along with our security guards, but they all interpreted it the same way. Protocol, safety measures, standard procedure for entering a medical facility. Nobody questioned it, nobody except me, because I saw how he dropped it. There was no care in that gesture, no respect for the weapon that had been his companion for years. He dropped it like it burned his hands, like it was contaminated with something only he could see. His fingers trembled as they released the rifle, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw his face contort with something between disgust and terror. The other Marines picked up his weapon, inspected it, secured it, business as usual, but I could not look away from his hands. They were shaking, and he was pressing them against his thighs, trying to make them stop. That is when I knew. This was not about the cuts on his face. This was about something far more dangerous. Thank you for staying with me until now. This shows that you feel the same thing I felt when I lived through all of this. So go ahead and subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because what comes next changes everything. I led him to examination room 4, away from the noise and the crowd. The room was small, with pale green walls and the constant hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I started with the basics, cleaning the cuts on his hands, checking his vitals. His heart rate was elevated, blood pressure high, but his body was perfectly still, almost rigid. I tried to make conversation the way I always do. Asked him about where he was stationed, what kind of training exercise caused the injuries. Nothing. He stared at a spot on the wall, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. I have been there. I know that place. After I came back from Kabul, I spent 6 months barely speaking. 6 months replaying everything I had seen, every decision I had made, every person I could not save. So I changed my approach. I pulled up a chair, sat down at his eye level instead of standing over him like a clinician, and I asked him the question that nobody else was asking. Are you okay? Really okay? His eyes finally moved from the wall to my face, and in that moment, I saw it all. The answer was no. Now I want to know from you. Where are you watching this story from? Write it in the comments. It is incredible to see people from so many places following stories like this. It took another 10 minutes of silence before he finally spoke. His voice was rough, like he had not used it in days. He told me his name was Corporal Jake Hendricks, 28 years old, sniper with the Marine Corps for 6 years. He had just returned from a deployment 3 weeks ago. A mission that went exactly according to plan. A mission that saved American lives. A mission that required him to make a decision that he would carry for the rest of his life. He did not give me details at first, and I did not push, but he kept talking, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. He told me about the weight of the rifle in his hands, how it used to feel like an extension of his body, a tool he controlled with absolute precision, but now it felt like a living thing, whispering reminders of what he had done. He told me he had not slept more than 2 hours at a time since coming home, that every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that moment. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said he could not do it anymore, could not carry that rifle, could not go back, could not keep living with what he knew. I have been trained for medical emergencies, gunshot wounds, cardiac arrest, trauma injuries, but this was different. This was a suicide risk standing right in front of me, and I had maybe minutes to act. I kept my voice calm, kept him talking while my mind raced through protocols. I reached for the emergency call button behind me, pressing it discreetly to alert the psychiatric team, but I did not let him see my panic. Instead, Instead, I did something that probably broke a dozen hospital regulations. I told him my story. I told him about the night in Kandahar when we lost 3 soldiers in an attack, and how I spent hours trying to save them, covered in their blood, knowing it was not enough. I told him about the shame I felt for surviving, about the anger that consumed me for months afterward, about the therapist who finally helped me understand that moral injury is not the same as moral failure. He was crying now, not loud, dramatic sobs, just silent tears running down his face while he stared at his hands. The same hands that had held that rifle, the same hands that were trying so hard to stop shaking. The psychiatric consultant arrived within 20 minutes, but before she could enter the room, 2 officers from Jake's unit showed up, a captain and a lieutenant, both looking impatient and irritated. They wanted to take Jake back to base immediately. They kept using words like temporary stress and operational fatigue and mission readiness. They assured me that their unit had protocols for this, that Jake just needed some rest, and he would be fine. I stood in that hallway, blocking the door to the examination room, and I said no. The captain looked at me like I had lost my mind. He reminded me that Jake was active duty military, that his chain of command had authority over his care, that I was overstepping my bounds as a civilian contractor. But I had seen this before. I had watched the military prioritize mission readiness over mental health. I had attended too many memorial services for soldiers who just needed rest. So I looked that captain in the eye and told him that if he tried to remove my patient from this hospital before a psychiatric evaluation was complete, I would document everything and report it to every oversight agency I could find. The silence that followed was deafening. Behind me, through the door, I could hear Jake's quiet breathing. He was listening to someone finally fight for him. The argument escalated. The lieutenant tried a different approach, talking about unit morale, about how pulling Jake from duty would affect the team, about the mission they had coming up. I pulled out my phone and started reading statistics. 22 veterans die by suicide every single day in this country. Snipers have even higher rates because of the isolated nature of their work and the moral weight of their decisions. Studies show that immediate intervention can reduce suicide risk by over 60%. The captain's face was red now. He accused me of being dramatic, of not understanding military culture, of treating a trained warrior like he was broken. That word, broken. It hung in the air like poison. And that is when Jake opened the door himself. He stood there, tears still wet on his face, and he said 3 words, "I need help." The officers went silent, because there it was. The admission they had been trying to prevent. The crack in the armor that could not be ignored anymore. Jake looked at me, then at his commanding officers, and repeated it. "I need help. I cannot go back like this. I am not okay." Jake was admitted to the psychiatric ward that night. The formal diagnosis was severe post-traumatic stress disorder with acute suicidal ideation. For the first 3 days, he barely spoke to anyone, except me. I know I was not supposed to visit him. He was not technically my patient anymore, but I went anyway, during my breaks, after my shifts. I brought him coffee the way he liked it, black with 2 sugars. I sat with him in silence when he could not talk, and slowly, piece by piece, he told me everything. The mission that broke him involved a hostage situation. He had seconds to make a shot that would save American lives. He made it. Perfect accuracy, just like his training. But there were complications. Things he had not seen until after. A child who was too close. He did not hit the child, but the trauma of that moment, the knowledge of how close it came, destroyed something in him. And then he told me about the others. 2 other snipers from his unit who had taken their own lives in the past 6 months. One in his barracks, one at home with his family. Jake had been at both funerals. He showed me the texts they had sent him before they died. Messages that sounded just like what he had been feeling. Nobody had connected the dots, or maybe nobody wanted to. I could not sleep that night. I kept thinking about those text messages, about the pattern that everyone was missing. 3 snipers from the same unit, all within 6 months, all after the same deployment. The next morning, I did something that I knew could end my career. I went to the hospital administrator and requested a meeting with the base commander. I brought documentation, statistics on suicide clusters among military units, research on moral injury and combat snipers, the names and dates of the 2 Marines who had already died. I told them that this was not isolated. This was systemic, and it was being ignored. The base commander was defensive at first, but I did not back down. I told him that if they did not implement immediate mental health screening for the entire unit, if they did not provide specialized trauma therapy for these soldiers, I would go to the media. I would contact veteran advocacy groups. I would make sure everyone knew that preventable deaths were happening because the system was failing. It was a threat, and it worked. Within a week, the story leaked anyway. A journalist had gotten wind of the suicide cluster and started investigating. My name came up. and suddenly, I was at the center of a scandal that reached all the way to the Department of Defense. The formal reprimand came 3 weeks later. I was cited for breach of patient confidentiality, for overstepping professional boundaries, for unauthorized contact with military personnel. My supervisor suggested I consider transferring to a different facility, but something else happened too. The Department of Defense launched an official review of mental health protocols for Special Operations Forces, specifically for snipers and designated marksmen. New mandatory screenings were implemented, specialized therapy programs were created, and Jake completed his treatment. 4 months after that night in the emergency room, he walked back into the hospital, not as a patient, as a volunteer. He had been medically retired from active duty, but he had found a new mission. He now works with a veteran crisis intervention program, using his own story to reach other soldiers who are suffering in silence. On his first day as a volunteer, he found me in the hallway. He did not say much, just shook my hand and thanked me for seeing what nobody else saw, for understanding that dropping that rifle was not about protocol or procedure. It was his last desperate signal, his final attempt to show someone that he was drowning. And somehow, through all the noise and chaos of that emergency room, I had heard it. This story shows how the real heroes are often not those who carry weapons, but those who have the courage to recognize when the real battle is internal. Now I want to know what you think about this. Have you witnessed or do you know someone who went through something similar? What is your opinion on how we treat the mental health of our veterans? Leave your opinion in the comments below. And if this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel for more real stories that need to be told. Do not forget to watch the next recommended video, where I share another experience that completely changed my perspective on caring for those who care for us.